I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark. Who's Mark? What's new with you? Nothing. I'm just reading. What a story, Mark. Anyway, how's your sex life? What? Look, why are you here? Me, Danny and Peter are about to play football. Would you like to play football with us? No. You're just a chicken. Cheep, 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 cheep. The f*** was that? Oh, hello. Well, welcome to another Rewind review. Well, in this video we're taking a look at The Room. Written and directed by Tommy Wiseau, The Room, released in 2003, sees an amiable banker's seemingly perfect life in San Francisco turned upside down when his deceitful fiancée embarks on an affair with his best friend. The movie stars Tommy Wiseau, Juliette Daniel, Greg Sestero, Philip Haldiman, Carolyn Minott and Robin Paris. The Room is one of the most infamous movies of all time. It is an anomaly of cinema in which every single decision that was made for this movie either went completely wrong or was just straight up bad. It's one of those movies that when I was watching it I did genuinely start questioning how on earth did this movie actually get made in the first place, because someone somewhere went, yes, we're making that. And by all accounts, behind the scenes it does look like it was a bit of an uphill struggle for them to actually get this made in the first place, because apparently, reportedly, they submitted the scripts to Paramount Pictures, and usually Paramount normally get back to people within a few weeks or so, and apparently they rejected the script within 24 hours. But that didn't stop it, and we have the movie. Now chances are you guys watching this video, you've either seen the movie or you have seen little bits of it here and there, or at least heard of it, probably all for the wrong reasons. When it comes to me and my experience with this movie, I've only literally just watched it. This was the first time that I've actually watched it all the way through. Up until this point in time, I've only ever seen clips. I have seen a lot of reviews from other people on YouTube. I kind of knew what the movie was about and sort of how it all sort of like unfolds, so I didn't really want to see it. I don't really make a habit of watching bad movies just for the sake of watching them, because if I know it's bad, I'm not really going to go near it. But this is one of those movies that has a reputation of being so bad that it's actually quite funny. And the clips that I had seen of it in the past genuinely did make me laugh, and I thought, you know what, I'm kind of curious, I want to at least watch it at least once. So yes, I have seen this movie, all 99 minutes of it. It did not disappoint. When it comes to the story for this movie, it is a very basic plot. It is basically something that you'd normally find in a soap opera. Johnny, played by Tommy Wiseau, is due to be married, and his fiancée, or his future wife as he constantly refers to her, Lisa, is beginning an affair with Johnny's best friend. And that's basically it. There's a lot of other stuff that is added into this. There's a lot of other little subplots and all sorts that are sort of mentioned but never really sort of get like paid off, really sort of like brought up ever again. Like there's a whole subplot with a character called Denny, who's basically like Johnny's, I don't really know what he actually is to him. He basically sort of looks up to Johnny as his father figure. So there's like this little scene where he goes up onto a rooftop and it turns out that he's been like buying drugs off of someone, and then it all just sort of kicks off and escalates and it gets quite violent for some reason, and it's just never brought up ever again. But the main plot of this movie focuses on the affair and what the impact of that has on Johnny. It does follow all the plot points, all the little beats that you'd normally find within a story that you would find in a soap opera. But I feel like if it was in much better hands, if it was in very talented writers, I think that this could have been a really interesting, very good character study, and it's seeing what it is that these characters are going through in the mindset that they're in. But that would mean that the characters need to be very developed and they'd need to be performed by absolute stellar actors, none of which actually happens in this one. The characters are very two-dimensional. There's not really an awful lot to them. Like there's a few scenes where they do try and flesh them out a little bit, but it's more just exposition more than anything. And a lot of these exposition dumps are really from Lisa's mother, who has a really big presence in this movie, despite the fact that she doesn't really sort of factor into the plot in any way. I know that they are trying to build up the internal conflict with these characters, but it just doesn't work at all. If we don't see anything that's going on, we can't get invested in it. You know, it's slightly ironic that they bring up all this information about these characters and yet we don't really know that much about them. They do say and they do establish as much as they can. But like when it comes to Johnny, for instance, I don't think that they ever actually mention what it is that he does for a living in the movie. The only reason that I know that he works as a banker is because I read the blurb. The characters are just so paper thin and they are completely two-dimensional. They only ever really are defined by one thing. When it comes to Lisa, for example, it's a mixture of the writing, the direction and the performance that really does muddle this character up, because I feel like she does have potential to be a very complex, very interesting character because of what it is that she's going through. But there's so many scenes where it just sort of bounces back and forth between how she actually sort of feels about Johnny in any given moment. That's just like, well, how exactly does she actually feel about him? I know that might be the point, but I think actually showing a bit more of what's going on inside her head might have actually helped a bit more. Because like there's some scenes where she's with him and she's just so happy and she's having an absolute blast with him, but then other scenes she's just like, oh, I don't love him anymore and he's really boring and everything, which I just don't understand whatsoever, because Johnny's the most entertaining thing in this. I do feel like it is a mixture of all those things that went into letting this character down, and it's the exact same thing with Mark, who's Johnny's best friend. There are a few scenes here and there where they do try and go for the conflicted feelings that he does have, but it doesn't really sort of feel like he is sort of putting up any sort of fight or resistance or anything whenever Lisa turns on the charms. There's even a scene where he basically tries to kill someone because they've figured out what's going on, and it just comes so out of the blue that it's just like, okay, we could have established that he might have had anger issues or something a little bit earlier on, which might have made it a bit more sense. The writing for this movie is all over the place, because it comes across as somebody who doesn't really understand the basic structure of the story that it is that they are trying to tell. It comes across as somebody who doesn't actually understand how it is that people talk and how people interact and bounce off each other. So there are some really, really awkward lines of dialogue in this, and they just do not feel real. And as I said, mixed together with the fact that the performances can be just so varied, with some people being admittedly okay and some kind of leaning into the more sort of over the top things. I think that they sort of knew what it was that they were doing, but then others just, I have no idea what it is that they were going for. There are attempts here and there where the writing does attempt to try and get a little bit deeper, and it does try and get across a little bit of messaging, but none of it really sort of ties into the story in any way. It just sort of feels a bit random. Like, as I said, there is a subplot involving Denny basically being caught up in this drug scandal that just sort of happens, and then there's like some of the most over the top acting in the entire movie, because like Lisa's trying to be like sort of reassuring but still quite like, what, why are you doing this, what's going on, and then she's just like screaming at him.
Denny, look at me in the eyes and tell me the truth. We're your friends.
I bought some drugs off of him. I don't have them anymore.
What the hell is wrong with you?
It's just like, oh my god, it's so over the top, it's just brilliant. And then there's this little scene later on where Johnny's talking about the world being a better place, and like, it is going for the sort of like, sort of point, but it comes out of nowhere, and it is genuinely like, why is that even in here? And there is one scene where I did expect it to kind of get just a tiny bit more emotional, maybe not necessarily how I was sort of feeling, but I was expecting that the characters might get a little bit more emotional, and that's where Lisa's mother admits that she has breast cancer, but then both characters just kind of forget that she's brought it up and continue talking about what's been going on with the affair, and it's like, that's a pretty big deal to bring up, and it just not even talking about it. So I do feel like a lot of this stuff that is brought up is just unnecessary, and you didn't need to include it. And what's with all the football in this as well? There's just so many sequences involving these guys just playing catch with the football, and it doesn't really add anything to this whatsoever. And as I said, when it comes to the characterisation of pretty much every character in this movie, they just don't really have that much character or personality to them outside of one or two things, and it's just like they really could have done something a bit more with them. Like, Denny's a big character in this movie and he does have a big presence in this film, but they don't really do much with him outside of just a load of football scenes and that one sequence on the roof with the drug guy. There's moments in this movie where he just kind of like appears and he just sort of like stops and he just watches Lisa And there's a bit like early on in the movie where Lisa and Johnny are in the bedroom and they're getting a bit frisky with each other, and he's just kind of like there watching them, and then it's just like, it did cross my mind once or twice that he did come across very creepy, and I was kind of thinking that might have actually been the story, that maybe he is going to basically turn into like a stalker or something, which might have made this a bit more interesting, to be honest. But they don't do anything with that, so I don't understand why those scenes were done in that way, and why the performance was that way, and why it was directed that way. That's the same with a lot of the scenes with Lisa as well, because it sort of feels like it could potentially go in a direction where she and Mark attempt to kill Johnny. It sort of feels like it is gonna go in that way, but they don't really sort of do anything with that. Again, that could have been quite an interesting, fun direction for them to have gone in, but they just don't do that. I've got to be honest, one of the things that did cross my mind very early on in this movie was, I think somebody's gonna die, and I did kind of predict it. Not necessarily who it was, but there was enough in there that I just thought, I think somebody's gonna die. The characters are bad. They just do not have enough to do. There is nothing really interesting about them whatsoever. They really should have done so much more with them. Like, even some of the introductions to them is so random, and it's just like they don't even get a proper introduction at all, to the point where there are characters who just appear, have something big to say, and then they just disappear again, and you just never see them again. Like, there's a guy who actually walks in on Lisa and Mark having an affair, and he has a go at them, and I genuinely sat there going, who is this guy? This really isn't the movie to start asking questions. They're just really bland, and there's just nothing to these characters, and the performances, there's only like 3 actors in this that I think are okay at best, but everyone else, it's just, the performances are just so varied that it just isn't good at all. And also, all the characters in this are supposed to be friends of Johnny, and it's like, all of them seem to be aware of what's going on between Mark and Lisa, and it's like not one of them gives him a heads up whatsoever. That's kind of crappy of them, to be honest. But the best thing in this movie, without a doubt, is Tommy Wiseau as Johnny. He gives a performance in this movie that is unlike anything I have ever seen before, because it incorporates everything that you aren't supposed to do. The inflections in his voice whenever he gets emotional is so off. All the little scenes and bits of chemistry and dialogue and everything between people, it's just, none of it lands whatsoever. His range is just so all over the place that none of it makes sense. None of it ever actually lands when it is supposed to. And it is so entertaining. Because like, there's some scenes where he's got like big bits of dialogue where he's like talking about a certain subject, and then he sort of changes onto another subject altogether, but there's like no pausing or anything between these things. It's just such a sidestep for some of these conversations where he's like talking about his clients and whatever and all sorts, and the next thing he just goes, anyway, how's your sex life? And it's just like, what? His performance is just so much fun to watch. It's awful, but it is so entertaining. His line delivery is just so all over the place that these most generic lines that you could possibly say are made so much more iconic just from the way that he says them.
Hi, doggy.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her.
You're just a chicken. Chip, 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 chip. You are tearing me apart, Lisa.
I did not. What a story, Mark.
In a few minutes, bitch.
Oh, hi, Mark.
It's one of the best bad performances I've ever seen, and it is hand on heart the reason why this movie can be so enjoyable. Now, having Tommy Wiseau actually in front of the camera isn't an experience in and of itself, but with this movie, he does a little bit more than that. He is the writer, the director, and the producer on this movie, and that just takes this off into new heights of insanity. The direction, I don't normally talk about that much when it comes to a lot of the films that I have reviewed on this channel, but I've got to mention it in this one because it is all over the place. It does feel very staged, and it does kind of have that sort of like puppet master kind of feel too, where it's like, okay, when you do this you say this, when you do this you say this, or do this when this happens. Because there's a scene where Lisa is unpacking a bag and she's talking to her friend, but it's like she takes something out, she says a line, she takes something out, she says a line, she takes something out, she says a line. That's kind of how a lot of the movie does kind of feel. I think one of the funniest ones is actually when Lisa and Denny return home after they've been out somewhere, and They go in through the front door, they're having a conversation, and then they sit down on the floor for no reason whatsoever, and then they stand up again, and then he leaves, and it's just like, why was that even in there? It also feels like a lot of the different scenes and lots of different sequences and different locations that they go to are kind of filmed very differently as well, because like when Tommy Wiseau's kind of like just walking around San Francisco, like there's some really nice shots of the city. I really do like some of these scenery that they have gone for with this one, just like when he's walking around and all the backgrounds and everything. And there's lots of really big wide visuals to really sort of showcase the landscape and show what's going on in the backgrounds. I'll be honest, a lot of these scenes don't really make a lot of sense with regards to what's going on, because we don't really sort of know what the characters really sort of doing at this point in time. Most of the movie takes place within this house. A lot of those sequences are just like a lot of head and shoulders shots, and just like that's really it. There's not really an awful lot of variety to it or creativity. Like there's one sequence where Johnny and Lisa are sitting down on a couch, and Lisa's actually got like these two glasses, and she's like filling them up with alcohol. I don't even know what the stuff was, but she's putting them down on the table, and there's like these really big close-ups of the glasses when they go down, and honestly I was convinced that she was trying to poison him because of how obvious it was, but that doesn't happen. So what's with the close-ups? Then when it comes to the bedroom sequences, there's a lot of scenes where it's just like a shot of the bed and just the cameras panning across in this big sweeping motion. So a lot of these sequences don't always feel like they are part of the same movie, because everything is kind of shot a little bit differently. I do also find it quite funny that apparently when they were actually making this movie, that Tommy Wiseau insisted that he wanted to use both a film camera and a digital camera, and he wanted to actually be one of the first filmmakers to actually use both. And he was so on board with this that he actually bought a digital camera all of his own, so that was like $100,000 odd to actually purchase this thing. But what he didn't realise is that you kind of need to do things a bit differently for both versions of the camera, so you couldn't actually film everything simultaneously. And the funniest thing about it is, the movie, as is shown, is all made up of the film footage, so there wasn't any point in getting the digital. There's also a few green screen sequences in this movie. It's mostly when they're on the roof of the building, and it is so awkward, because you can tell it's green screen. It's not just the fact that like the background isn't really as blurry as it really should be to give like the actual perspective of where they are. It's the fact that you can kind of see the outline of where it is, and like the scenes of when Mark's like turning around, you can kind of see like the green reflecting on his face. It's just like, oh god. And speaking of being all over the place, the editing in this is awful, because like there's sequences in this that honestly I kept thinking like, but why is this happening when that was shown a little bit earlier on? Because there's like scenes where Johnny comes home and he's got like roses and all sorts, and it's like, yeah, but the other scene beforehand had him giving her roses, and it just like, I don't know, were things swapped around in this? Like there's a scene where Johnny is getting very suspicious of what Lisa is getting up to, so he decides very audibly, I will record them. And then he puts like this recorder next to the phone so he can record everything that's going on, all the conversations. And the way that it's edited, the way that it plays out, it feels like it's been recording for several days. And when he actually shows how big the tape actually is, I genuinely went, are you sure that recorded that entire time? It just makes no sense. There's just so many little continuity errors that just don't really add up. And it's just, honestly, it just makes it feel so much messier than it is. I might need to lie down after this one. Then we come to the sound design of this movie. Oh dear god. The sound design for this movie is just all over the place. Like there's scenes that make no sense. Like somebody is injured and then you can hear sirens off in the background despite the fact that nobody's actually called an ambulance or police or anything. And then there's like a scene where Johnny's like smashing a glass against the floor and it doesn't sound like glass, it sounds like a plate. And even like the most iconic shot of the movie where he's up on the rooftop and he throws the bottle on the floor, the sound effect that it makes, it doesn't sound like it's actually hit the floor of the building. It sounds like something completely different. At least in the intro that I made for this video, that is actually the sound of the bottle hitting the floor. But I've got to mention the ADR in this movie because, oh my god, it is awful. The idea of dubbing some of these voices because you weren't able to capture the dialogue properly on set because there was fans going off in the background or just generally a lot of noise going on, so they thought that it'd probably be best to come in and re-record those lines so you can actually help tell what it is that people are saying. But the catch is that you kind of need to make it line up and you need to make it match as much as possible. And in this movie, oh, it does not match at all. There are so many sequences where these characters are talking and their mouths are not in sync with what it is that they are saying. I feel like that is part of the reason why the performances are so flat in this movie, because they are basically just trying to recapture what it is that they said on set, but they weren't able to do it. And it did genuinely make me question, like, there are a few scenes where it does seem okay, and it does seem like they actually did capture sound that was actually on set, but it did kind of make me question, like, just how much sound did they actually capture there, because almost every scene does have ADR in some way. It's so noticeable, but it is so funny. The music's also quite an interesting decision that they've really gone for with this movie, because it does kind of have that sort of like a soap opera feel. Like, this definitely does add to that soap opera feel that this movie does have. Mladen Milosevic's score is very generic. There's not really a lot of variety to it. It just sort of like fades in and out whenever it is sort of like used throughout this movie. Like, it does kind of pop up at slightly random times. I gotta be honest, there were times it did sort of cross my mind, maybe this might have just been like stock music. It doesn't sound bad. It is a nice little theme, and I do think that it is something that will sort of stay in your mind for a bit longer than you probably would expect it to, but it's not really that memorable, and it definitely doesn't really stand out from any other score. There's even like a few tracks here and there that actually make this movie sound more and more like a horror movie, and as I said, like, if the stuff with Denny had sort of gone into like a bit more of like a creepy stalker sort of direction, I think that the theme actually would have worked quite well with that, and I just don't see why they couldn't have done something with that. Or the possible murder attempt story, which I think could have worked quite well in this. That sort of horror-esque music that they have gone for in this would have actually worked quite well in that story. It is fine overall, but I just don't think that it always works. There's even a few songs that are thrown in this as well, and again, it just sounds very generic what it is that they have gone for. Most of these songs tend to pop up during the love scenes, and it just adds to the awkwardness so much. Like, genuinely, the feel of those scenes is just, it just makes you feel really uncomfortable when you're watching these scenes. I've seen a lot of people say that those scenes feel like sequences from a lot of adult movies. I'll just leave it at that. And the songs do kind of add to that, and I definitely do understand where it is that they are coming from, because they just are so cheesy, and it's just so awkward to watch them. I mean, I've got to talk about them now that I've brought them up. Like, why is there so many love scenes in this movie? Like, fair enough, it is trying to showcase the affair, and it's trying to show what's going on, and it needs to show that Johnny and Lisa are very much in love at the beginning of the movie, so they need to sort of show that and establish that as much as they can. But those scenes are just so long, and it's genuinely like, do you need to see all of this, especially some of the stuff that you do see? And there was two things that crossed my mind watching these sequences. The first one is, don't have roses in your beds while you're doing stuff, because you don't want those things digging into you. And secondly, when it comes to the scenes with Johnny, where's he aiming? I know Tommy Wiseau might not be human, and that probably is how his species does reproduce, but even so, they're just really awkward sequences. And look, as I said, I do understand why they need to show some of these scenes, but they just don't need to show so much of them, because they're just so long and they're just so awkward. I mean, there's even one sequence in which I think it's Mike and Michelle, I can't remember the names of the characters, they enter Johnny's house and they're all over each other, and next thing you know, they're eating chocolates off each other, and then it just escalates from there. Cuts forward to a little bit later on, and then Lisa and her mother come in, and then they're like, oh, why are you two here? And then they just get up and leave, and it's like, did you two really just go over to your best friend's house, do stuff, and then leave? And bear in mind, we haven't even met these characters before at that point in time. We don't even know their names. They just sort of show up and do stuff. I will be honest though, from the performance of those two, I feel like those are the only actors in this movie that are aware that this movie just isn't good, and they fully play into it, so they do give some pretty hammy performances, and it is actually quite funny. Anyway, this movie is such a weird experience. If you've never seen this movie before, I don't know if I can actually recommend this movie to you. I feel like if you are somebody who understands what it is that you are going to get into, what it is that you are going to be watching, then I would suggest maybe getting a few friends together, getting some drink, getting some snacks, and just have fun with it. But I feel like if you aren't aware of what this movie is going to be, I just don't think that you're really going to enjoy it very much. In all honesty, my recommendation is people who are studying film, if you're really interested in getting into film and seeing how movies are made, one of the things that I do think is a really good idea is, rather than just watching a load of movies that are hailed as some of the best of all time and how you do this and this and this, I think take a look at these kind of movies, the ones that genuinely don't work, and you can see why it is that they don't work, and just analyse what it is about them that didn't work. I do think that that is a really good idea if you are studying film. But other than that, I genuinely can't recommend this movie. Overall, this movie is just awful. But that being said, it is bafflingly entertaining and it is very funny. Unintentionally so, but it is funny. Nothing about this movie works whatsoever. There's some nice shots of San Francisco, the music is okay, but the performances are all over the place. The story is a mess, the direction is all over the place, the editing is all over the place. This really does earn the title of one of the worst movies ever made. And I know that there are a lot of people who will say, surely it can't be that bad. And to them I say, oh yes, it is. But you will have fun watching it. If the movie was bad and boring, I just don't think that it would have the watchability factor that it does actually have. But because it is so awkward and because it is so funny, so unintentionally funny, it does make it quite entertaining to watch. So with all that being said, my rating for The Room is 2 out of 10. At this point in time, that is the lowest score I've given to a movie on this channel. As I said, if you know what it is that you're getting into, if you invite some friends over, get some drinks and whatever, I think that you will have fun with it. I will admit there is one bit of praise that I will genuinely give this movie, and that is because they did get this movie made. They definitely did try everything that they did to try and get this movie made when it was initially written. And I do appreciate that they did have the dedication to actually do that. It is so hard trying to get into the industry and make a movie, so the fact that they actually managed to do it is genuinely really impressive. And he does seem like somebody who genuinely does want to make movies, and he went out there and he did do it, so well done to him. Well, I think that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video. So if you have seen this video and you're enjoying this content, thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have had the misfortune of sitting through The Room, let me know down below what you think of it. Plus, if you have any recommendations for any future rewind reviews you would like me to do in the future, let me know. I've got some really big fun ones planned coming up, so keep an eye out for those. Also, let me know what you think about the new background. Just thought it was really nice just having the chance to really sort of like rotate the posters around, just get some other movies and TV shows up. Most of the posters that I did have up in the past were mostly just like newer movies from like 2020 onwards, so I just thought it'd be pretty cool just sort of expand that a little bit more and get things like Superman and Ghostbusters and all sorts up. So it's going to be staying like this for a little bit. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys. Oh, hi Mark.